Hello, everyone. Welcome to DILAN Delivers, a free webinar series sponsored by DILAN Consulting Group in San Francisco, California. Today's topic is the evolving role of HR. What is and what's next? Featuring our presenter, Ms. Danika Davis, and moderator, Dr. Eugene Dilán. My name is Paul Bayonne, and I'm a senior consultant at DILAN. I'll be your online host today. Let me begin with a brief description of DILAN Consulting Group. We are a team of psychologists who work with organizations to build their leadership and team capabilities. Our motto is business is human. The way we see it, our clients are experts in their field of business, and we at DILAN are experts about people and about understanding and shaping their behavior. When we merge these expertise domains together, that collaboration helps leaders, teams, and individuals unleash the human potential that enables their organizations to thrive. The goal of our free DILAN Delivers webinars is to present content that you might find both interesting and helpful in your organization's work efforts. We are recording this webinar for posting on DILAN's YouTube channel. You will receive an email from us soon with a link to this recording, as well as a link to a feedback survey about the webinar. On your Zoom screen, you should see both a chat button and a Q&A button. I'll be monitoring any questions that you submit via either of these two functions, and then posing your questions to our presenters either throughout the webinar or near its end, depending on how the webinar conversation is going. And with that, let me now introduce today's participants, Ms. Danika Davis and Dr. Eugene Dilán. Ms. Davis, long known as an HR evangelist, believes in the infinite power of human potential. Over a 3-decade career spanning in-house HR practitioner to HR community builder and educator to her current role, helping organizations build impactful people organizations that drive individual and collective success. And Ms. Davis embraces the constantly evolving nature of leading and managing people and organizations with a mix of idealism and common sense practicality. She brings insights from her time as an HR executive through her experience developing fellowship and educational opportunities for thousands of San Francisco Bay Area HR practitioners to her current role helping organizations build their people function as the head of MeritHR. She's been the CEO there for, I believe, just over 8 years. And MeritHR is an HR exclusive staffing, search, and consulting firm. She holds an MA in organizational management, a BA in English, and another BA in communications and public relations, and several HR certifications. Self-described foodie and wine aficionado, proud mother of 2, and she spends her free time seeing live music and traveling while living in beautiful wine country, Napa, California. Moving on to Dr. Dilán. Eugene is a 25 years history plus clinical psychologist and international consultant. He founded DILAN Consulting Group just over 12 years ago. We just celebrated our 12th anniversary a couple months ago. On that profound but simple belief that, business is human. And so I'm not going to go into a lot of details about that because we just talked about it a second ago, and you're going to hear a lot more about how that infuses Dilán as he poses questions to Ms. Davis. He's spent the last 20 or so years in the consulting firm, both nationally and internationally. And with that, I'm now going to stop sharing my screen, and we're going to go ahead and turn it over to Eugene. Eugene, take it away.
Hello, Danika, and thank you, Paul, for the introduction. It's so good to have you here and to be able to spend this hour with you. I don't know what else to say except that I really value our friendship and the work that we've done together, and I think this is going to be a fun hour. So with that, I'm wondering if there's anything else you want to add in terms of introduction. Otherwise, we're going to go ahead and jump in.
I'm all for jumping in, Eugene.
Okay, great. So Danika, I'm going to ask you because I really do believe that you're in a unique position because you've held different roles in the HR world, from developing HR professionals to being an HR professional to now running an HR organization as well. So what I want to know a little bit is about the history of HR in terms of where it's been, and a little bit about where you think this field is going.
Fantastic. As you know, since we have known each other going on, 15 years now, Eugene, I think, This is something I spend a lot of time thinking about. I am a recovering HR practitioner, as I usually describe myself. And I think that maybe the easiest way to give us a frame for where it's been and where it's going, considering that my career started before cell phones, email, Google, all of those other things.
Mine too. But we're
is
aging
to
ourselves.
think
Let's
about
not do that.
is to think about it in the context of what we call it. I again, recovering HR practitioner, recovering English major. I think words are really important, and language is shared meaning. So the history of HR in a few titles, which is coming from industrial relations, which were really the only degree programs that were available in HR 20, 30 years ago, mostly coming out of the Midwest, mostly focused on union labor relations type work. So industrial relations turns into personnel. So the first time we see a person enter the room is with the term personnel. It is usually the back office on a plant, or even when I was in college applying for jobs at Macy's, the HR people were in a Quonset hut in the parking lot, right? And they were doing all of the paperwork related to the people function. And then you have human resources come onto the scene, which has been the longest living of any of these titles, and certainly the one that has been dominant in my own career. And I like the combination, your business is human, and you need to be resourceful in this. We then morph over to what's still in some of the business literature, and what never personally resonated with me was human capital management, right? And I think that one came out of HR trying to grow up and say, I am HR and I'm a business person, right? So we call ourselves human capital management. But I don't know many that want to be someone's capital, quite honestly.
Yeah.
I'd much rather be someone's resource. Do you want to be
Yeah,
somebody's
it
capital?
sounds like you're commoditizing humans, and we never
Exactly.
want to do that, right? Because
Right.
humans are humans.
Yep, exactly. So until what we're seeing now, which is the morph into people. So let's just get cut right to the chase, is that you're seeing more titles. It's a chief people officer, people and culture, people operations. And I really started seeing that for the first time about 8 years ago, mostly in tech companies, that they were calling their human resources function. And I'm a little bit of an old dog, so you'll hear me revert back to human resources. I'm trying to move over into people. But I really think that the shift in focus is revealed through the change in the language that we're using. And we're seeing this all over the world, right? How we are much more intentional about the language we use and how it describes that. And to show how juxtaposed it is, I was at an event 3 months or so ago now, and I was talking to an individual younger in their career than me. And I said, do you have an HR role? And he said, no. I'm like, oh, well, then what brought you to this networking event? And he said, I'm in people operations. And I said, well, can you help me understand the difference? And he said, well, HR is, that back office stuff, the administration and the paperwork. And people operations is really about talent acquisition, talent development, helping people be their best. And I was a bit dumbfounded, right, as a career practitioner. And little judgment crept in. I'm like, it's a little full of himself. And then I realized on my BART ride home that if you'd have called me personnel in 1995, those have been fighting words. I was not personnel. I was HR. So we're just in the middle of another tectonic shift as far as the history goes.
So, Danika, I also hear a lot of people identify themselves as a business partner. Where does that fall into that mix?
That term was really popularized in the mid to late 90s by kind of a guru in the HR space named David Ulrich. And his perspective was that HR needed to get out of the back office and be more involved in the business. You started to hear that HR didn't just have to be experts in regulation and make sure all the paperwork was filed, and it was paperwork, and not the euphemism that we use the word paperwork for now. And that you really had to be a strategic partner to the CEO and have a seat at the table, right? So all of that was being promulgated or encouraged by Mr. Ulrich, and he's still very active in the HR thought leadership space now. And it is probably one of the most attractive jobs in HR. It's also structural, not just the focus around longer term optimization of your people and building satisfying and meaningful careers, those things. It is putting HR much closer and more integrated into operations, which is a trend we continue to see as organizations flatten more. The HR business partner, as has traditionally been deployed, is you're assigned to a business unit and you have a client group and you become very knowledgeable about the people as individuals, what that business unit's long-term objectives are, all of those things. So business partner work is exciting. It has a parallel that people often developed what were called centers of excellence at the same time. So those other things that still need to be done, right? The compensation management, the benefits management, payroll, all of those other types of things were handled more by specialists.
Yeah.
And the challenge of that structure, although I love it, is that most of us aren't in big organizations. So it's difficult to have specialization like that when you're in smaller entities. And most companies out there and organizations are under 1,000 employees, maybe a 5 to 8 HR people. There's just not enough to spread around.
I love that you were able to pull his name out just like that and say that was complicated by blah 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 blah. I said, when promoting this, that you're really smart, and so it stands my belief that you're one of the smartest people I know. We've been living in some really turbulent times, and turbulence can be good because sometimes you shake things up and great stuff comes from it. But in this world that we're in right now, what do you think the top 3 challenges that HR or people operations are having to deal with right now? And what are your ideas in terms of how this world is going to influence HR, people operations going forward?
Okay. I have said this next sentence a lot of times, and every single time I've uttered these words, they've been absolutely true. It is a fascinating time to be in HR. And I think it's a fascinating time to be alive and in management and leadership positions in general, but in HR specifically, and maybe there's a little bias there since I've spent my life in this work. Individuals are rethinking how, when, even where, even why they work, right? And we just went through something together that kind of turned all of our assumptions on their head, which has huge societal impacts. So therefore it has to have organizational impacts. And the top 3 areas that I think that now in this time of great flux, we're in a time that's no different than when we all came off the farm and went to the city or worked in factories and in the industrial age and then the knowledge work. And now we have this new thing. And in many ways, we are designing, building, and flying the plane at the same time, which is fascinating and somewhat exhausting. So to try and get to your question, the top 3 areas that I see as challenges, areas of focus for organizations and therefore for HR, right? HR does not, or people operations doesn't just, oh, we're going to go do this today. You're responding to a need in many cases. And one of the biggest impacts of HR is building and sustaining a culture that helps people do their best work. And that was true before, and it's true now. It's just that some of the expectations of work are changing so dramatically. We've got hybrid. We've got a renewed focus on fairness and diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. We have different ideas about structure. As I mentioned, we have a flattening of organizations, right? And where people are having to have a lot more breadth and scope in whatever they do. But I don't know a profession that's more true of than HR, where you have to, I was messing with Chat GPT this week and I said, give me the 10 top skills of great HR people. And communication came up, analytical skills came up, HR expertise came up, problem solving came up, coaching and development. So when do usually coaching and analytic skills go in the same person? usually you divide those things up. So that's a very long answer to say the first area I see is really this figuring out of how to build and sustain these
Yeah.
thriving cultures at work. And then I'll revisit some of these. I'll just name the other two. Talent acquisition and retention is still top of mind, even in this age we have right now. There's been 3.2 million layoffs since the first of the year. So why is talent acquisition still important? Because you still need to fill roles with the right people. With the right skills. I might hone that a little bit. And then you also need to retain those people that you want to keep inside your organization, with another little twist to it. So in the second one of talent acquisition and retention, it's estimated that 50% of US workers will be freelancing in the next 5 years. So what does it mean to bring skill sets that are needed into your organization? Are they employees? Are they contractors? Is it just in time? And how does that impact that culture? Those two are very intertwined.
And that question that you just posed, are they employees, are they contractors? I somehow feel that the structures we've set up legally, contracting employees, may not fit what the work world's going to require going forward. So to some degree, we may need to rethink that. And I can give you the example for me, even though I have part-time people who work with me, they cannot be contractors. They have to be employees. So some people don't want to be an employee that's part-time because there's a benefit to being a contractor. And so I somehow think we even have to rethink the legal structures that are allowed in order to be able to adjust to the future world of work.
I could not agree with you more. It's very challenging. And we know that regulation is usually 20 to 30 years behind. 20 to 30 years. And that's been a consistent statistic over time. And so if we have this desire for people to own their career more, not a job, and that's a big distinction, right? And to want to go and do different things and to freelance more, but not necessarily in the sense that everybody wants to be an Uber driver, but where they want to specialize and pick their projects and move on for their own learning and development and interest. You're right that the current employment constructs don't support that very easily.
And the other thing that we haven't touched on, but you touched on it briefly, Danika, is that, so we're talking about the world being, crazy as it is. We're talking about the evolving world of HR, people operations. And then you have the overlay of AI and technology, and whoa, I'm exhausted just trying to keep up with it. What are your thoughts about that?
My thought is that technology came late to many HR practices. We were not seen as an area for investment for a long time, and I have some thoughts on why that might be as well. I say we got to embrace it because it's here. I don't know what to do with it. I really don't. But I was on a session this morning for an hour and a half on how AI is going to impact recruiting, and then you can read as much time as you have. You can find that many opinions on if it's a good thing, a bad thing. Are we asking the computer overlords for permission to take us over? But you can't hide from it, right? As you and I mentioned early in this meeting, I didn't know email existed when I started practicing because it hadn't been invented yet. And yet here we are, and my life is managed by email. And I'm not afraid of it. I use it as a tool. And I think that one of the amazing things about people, because I do believe they have infinite potential, is the ability to adapt. And as we've moved beyond, certainly in the practice of HR, these tools, which many are still afraid of, it's interesting to me when I'll have a business leader who calls and wants to talk about up-leveling, is almost always the expression that they use when talking about their HR function. And there's certainly a lot of things that can mean, but almost always they have an incumbent HR person who refuses to embrace technology.
Yeah.
And you have some people who really embrace technology and say, I can't get the budget to
and that's
put
where
these tools in. Yeah. So, there's more than two flavors, but those are the two extremes of it, where HR people who really want to leverage technology and can't get budget, And then those who are very comfortable in the way they've done it for 10 or 15 years, or 20 or 30 or 40, careers last a long time right now.
Yep. I have
So,
a friend who took a job, and they hired her because she had done all this, innovative stuff and technology. And then she gets into the job and now she's demoralized because they don't have the budget for any of those bells and whistles that they wanted her to implement. So she's kind of a little bit at a loss and thinking maybe she made the wrong choice. But I digress a little bit. I do want to come back to, you mentioned COVID a little bit. And
yeah.
you mentioned that people had a period of really reevaluating, why do I work? How much do I want to work? How do I want to work? And I'm seeing, again, with my clients that organizations are struggling, because they have ways of getting the work done, and oftentimes the right hand's connected to the left, so you can't just accommodate everyone individually, because sometimes then the system breaks down. So what are your thoughts around how we might, as people in this field, begin to support organizations in navigating this new mindset around how people want to live and work?
Wow, if I had a succinct answer to that, I'd get myself a ghostwriter and retire. I think.
Well, the good news is it doesn't have to be succinct. We
Oh,
still have
okay.
about 40
Well,
minutes.
good, because I
before.
rarely am succinct. I saw a funny meme the other day that says, am I working at home or living at work? And that rings so true to me personally as I sit in my lovely home in
Yeah.
Napa right now. I do think there has to be an element of mass customization around this, though. I think that in every element of our lives, we have so much more control than we used to. I mean, how our screens look, even my my standing desk that goes up and down. I'm talking about very simple mechanical things, but I set things up the way I want them to be. And I think that work has been the last vestige of you do things more how others want you to do them. And I'm not suggesting anarchy. I'm really not. But especially as we look at hybrid work or the return to work, and the vast majority of jobs still can't be done remotely. We do live in a bit of a bubble in the knowledge work of the Bay Area, right?
Yeah.
So there's an awful lot of work that just isn't eligible for remote or hybrid. And I certainly know in our own clients, even though many of the types of industries we support that could be done remotely, we rarely get a fully remote search for an HR person. It's almost always hybrid. And lately it's on-site is what they're asking people to do. So just speaking strictly of hybrid then, I read a statistic yesterday that said 52% of workers say that working at home makes them feel disconnected from colleagues to the point that they would consider leaving. And then the same survey said, and 64% say going back to the office will have a negative impact on your health. So
Yeah,
I think both of those things are held in our mind at the same time
that's right.
as we approach this topic. So my suggestion, which works easier in smaller companies than larger ones, is one size fits all likely isn't going to work. That you're going to have to do the work as an entity, whether an HR person or someone else, of really evaluating each role and what is gained and lost between hybrid and not. And the entities that are just kind of making these policies, folks are gaming the system like crazy, right? I have a colleague who they have a policy that people have to be in the office 3 days a week, but and they're checking to make sure their badge comes in and that. And what they've recently found is that people are commuting on company time now, whereas because there's no parameters around when they're in the office, so they pop in for an hour and lose 3 hours of productivity if they'd have been working at home. Wow. And then the other part of that, though, is if we are bringing people back because we believe it helps with mentoring, collaboration, relationships, and trust building, all of which I believe that is much more effective in person, we have to be very mindful that that's what's happening. that we aren't just making an edict to prove that I am the employer and you must do what I say, because it's creating resentment to have you commute in to do a task that could more effectively be done remotely. So really, what does that look like intentionally to have collaboration and teamwork and build relationships when we are asking people to be in? So the work is harder. So that's why it's not an easy answer. I don't think I have an answer, but my inclination is that we need to do more work to make this work.
Yeah,
Instead
it's
of
going to be
passing
really,
it
really
down.
hard because people are unique. I read somewhere that there were integrators and separators. And those people who are integrators sometimes do better at home because that's how they naturally flow. And then you have the people who are separators who, even though they may like being at home, they have a hard time turning it off. And so again, the article went on to say that if you were a separator, you should have a designated place in the home, that's the only place where you ever work, and you need to set boundaries and things of that sort. But what I'm trying to get at is that people are unique. And to your point, I have my latte low fat, no foam. We've kind of gotten accustomed to having it our way. And so how do we do that? And at the same time, make sure that the work is getting done, the culture, because as you said, culture is really important. It's the glue that keeps people attached to the organization, that the culture, communication, conflict management, creativity, that all those things are still being I think supported, while at the same time honoring people's preferences. Paul, it looks like you have a question.
Well, we had a question that came in on the Q&A, and I think it's kind of dovetails with the conversation right now. And the question is, how important would you say it is for HR to be flexible with policies and procedures that are put in place and adapt to meet people's specific needs? For example, childcare, sick, injured family members, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, I think both of us are saying it's very important, but not very easy to do it on an individual level. That's why I mentioned the larger the entity. And then you get the whole specter of liability. Are you being fair? Is it preferential? Is it intentional or not?
And
Right?
then
Is there
there's
disparate
regulations.
impact? And the regulations
State by
around
state
it.
regulations that you can do this for this employee in this state, but you can't do it in that state. So it's so complicated.
It is, as my grandmother used to tell me, nothing good is ever easy. And I think that this falls squarely in that place. So overall, I am a proponent for the most flexibility you can give and still have a cohesive and effective organization. I didn't always feel that way, right? I'd like to go back and apologize to everyone I interacted with when I was 25 and an HR generalist and enforcing draconian policies. And the only way I know we're going to get to success on this is to look at where we were, which to me doesn't feel that long ago, right? Where you left your problems at the door, right? This was a workplace. You didn't, the whole bring your authentic self to work. We actively discouraged that for a very long time. And we figured out how to accommodate that, or not accommodate that. That's not the right word. Welcome, encourage, celebrate that so that people can be their best selves, right? That is, to me, what great culture is, that people are invited into a structure that supports them to do the best work of their lives. And they feel that way too. And as employers or organizations, we reap the benefits of that. So I do think that if we can find a way, and we will, it's just not imminently in front of us, to be as flexible as possible, because I don't think that genie is going back in the bottle. Quite honestly, I think that, would you now even think about, this is a silly example, going to buy a car without doing any research or knowing what the comps were or any of that? We don't. We just have access to so much more information, which gives us more bargaining power, if you will. And the same is true in the workplace. I don't think that top talent is going to be attracted to an environment that is seen as rigid or uncaring. And almost every client we talk to, when we say, what do they want? They all want top talent. And then I ask them a question that stumps half of them. And it's, well, why is this a top job? It's like, wait, what? I'm like, well, you want top talent. Help me understand how this is a top company, top job, top any of those things, because the two things go together.
And the other thing I would add here, Danika, that it's not a one and done discussion, that what my life phase right now requires, or my preferences right now, a year or two from now might be different. And so I think employers need to have a mindset that you're engaging people in an ongoing conversation. And because if you consider it a one and done, I think, again, at some point, people's needs change, and somehow we need to be able to pivot. We need to be able to be flexible enough, as you said. I also want to add in another point that I think is important.
Yeah.
There's a part of me that thinks that if we had a social health system, that would bring in a lot of flexibility into the work world, because people could easily then be a contractor, or in that way would free up people to not feel like they need to stay someplace because of health needs. That, again, that structure, I think, would give us more flexibility, but that's a whole other conversation.
That is a very big other conversation.
Yes.
I will say that we're closer than we used to be, right? That we're still very much an employment-based healthcare system, but with the birth of the exchanges, there are people that do go and get benefits and things like that. So there is progress. And Eugene, I really try and look at progress. I think the definitions of success is moving forward, not always as quickly as we want to,
Yep.
but staying focused on the progress we are making is an important lens at which to look through things. Otherwise, nothing's ever right, because it's never finished, to your point, that it is iterative. So not only does a person's expectation, an individual's expectation, change based on where they are in their life or what have you, but all kinds of other things change.
That's
I mean,
right.
I was only 1 year older from 2019 than I was from 2020, but my viewpoints changed dramatically in that time frame. So to constantly re-examine is an important point.
Danika, I'm going to jump around a little bit. We've been talking about retention and attrition, and I happen to know, and you probably have these statistics right in your back pocket, knowing you as I do, that HR people are actually, struggling in terms of, retention, and along with that, there's also a lot of burnout happening in the HR community. What are your thoughts and ideas around why and what could be done? Because I do think that there's a real need to address that. So I'll just leave it there.
And I still haven't given you the third thing that I think is important in HR right now, but I'm going to answer this one right now. So just as, and I don't mean to diminish the role that frontline healthcare workers were playing during the pandemic, in an organizational sense, the parallel to those nurses and doctors was HR people. And just as we saw an exodus from the profession because they were burned out, I mean, there's been a huge amount of attrition in nurses. Right now, there's a huge amount of attrition with teachers. And the being on that front line for the 2 years where it was really intense, where everything was up in the air, right? And people were afraid. And so you were processing your own emotions, other people's emotions at the same time, trying to keep your organization as a going and thriving enterprise. It was emotionally exhausting, is one of the reasons I think for that burnout that happened. And I am really proud of HR people for stepping up, by the way, that somebody had to figure this out. And because it was coming out of the regulatory environment, it's like, right. Oh, these are employment regulations. Therefore, this is HR. Congratulations, figure this out. And working with other leaders, I think they did a really good job at a really difficult situation. And I know you have a background in clinical psychology, and many of your colleagues too. By the way, HR people have no training in how to separate our own emotions from those we're trying to help. So I think that drove a lot of burnout. So did the fact that we had a lot of retirement during COVID because some people just didn't want to figure it out.
That's right.
Right. I'm done. My stock portfolio was doing pretty good over the last few years. I'm out. And those people are coming back, that they retired early, but they're coming back to do project work, to do the part that what we were talking about a minute ago. They want to be part of that freelance movement. And we went directly from that kind of full stop, figure it out, while we're figuring out that, the crash didn't happen in most industries. We're hiring like crazy. We were incredibly busy at MeritHR because people needed more people in HR to figure this out. So there was really no rest between any of these major shifts. And then guess what? In the span of less than a year, we go from massive, rampant, can't arbor you fast enough to 3.2 million layoffs. HR people are just tired and of whipsawing like that. And it's not, I'm making it sound more dramatic than it is. The news shows you all of the huge drops. Most is more gradual than that. So I think that a few things. I don't think this pace of change that we're on is going to lessen.
Nope.
Anytime soon. I think it's fascinating. It's an interesting time. So people who are attracted to big, meaty problems are going to thrive in this environment. So I think that's exciting. I think that we need to acknowledge that there isn't an answer. There are probably multiple right ones, and be willing to iterate and accept that if it's not working, then what else are we going to try?
That's right.
Rather than feeling like we're failing. I think that will help a lot with burnout. And that's in all professions, but HR is a little bit at the epicenter of all of this.
That's right.
Right now. I think we need to ask for help a little more and tap experts. As you know, I'm a big believer in peer networks. So finding solace at best, that it's not just you, and or sharing. HR people tend to share their ideas and what's worked and hasn't for them. I think there's a lot of good things there, and being willing to iterate is super important to avoid burnout, because otherwise, if you think that if I just think about it longer, I'll come up with the perfect answer, you're fooling yourself. And so what is that? Disappointment is expectation poorly managed.
That's right.
So that's where I see HR being able to help themselves a bit and really take the advice that you give others in this same context and focus on the progress.
And I would say what you just said, I want to underscore that reaching out and connecting with other professionals, because we know from the world of psychology that connection is one of the buffers in terms of, stress and resilience. When you have connection, oftentimes you can get through something that you wouldn't have been able to get through otherwise. That's why there's 12-step groups and weight loss groups and every kind of group that you can think of, because we're social beings, and it's through connection that sometimes we find the inner strength to kind of keep going forward. And so it's important that I think HR professionals continue to do that.
Well, Eugene, to that point, though, I think it's one of the reasons that the reports of stress are so much higher across the board is this social experiment we find ourselves in the middle of. I couldn't agree more. And I don't have a PhD in psychology, that humans are social animals, and we are in many ways living in more isolation than we ever have. And that we've been talking about how institutions have been disappearing in our society for a long time. And work was really kind of the last institution where you came together and did things for many people. So as much as I love working at home, I do feel like I have more stress because I feel more isolated. So I have to make more of an effort to connect than I used to. And I think that's true of every human being on this planet, unless it's working for them. And for some people it is, but For those of us who thrive on connection, I mean, you could quote all the statistics on the incidence of depression. All of these things have been tied to a greater feeling of isolation in society as a whole. So connection is hugely important.
Yeah.
In this area.
All of my friends who are doing clinical work, their practices are completely full. And every time I try and refer someone, there's no availability. So even right now, there's someone I'm trying to refer, professional connection I'm trying to refer to someone, and I can't get them an appointment. So it's really difficult right now because people are struggling with depression and anxiety and isolation and all of those things. So Danika, I know that you want to share number 3 that I'm going to come back to that, and then I have a couple of more questions for you.
Of course you do. Of course you do. And as always, our conversations are pretty free ranging. The third one, when I said that it was the focus around culture with certainly the DEI flexibility, all of those things coming in, then talent acquisition and retention, and a huge driver on all of that is what I'm calling a rebirth of learning and development in organizations. We're calling it talent development, talent management, pick a title of it, but it is organizations purposely rethinking how to invest in their employee populations, even though it might not just be employees, to keep those skills fresh. It's one of the number one things that individuals, especially younger individuals, are looking for in organizations. It is one of the hallmarks of success of any profession, regardless of discipline, is continuous learning. And organizations kind of kick that to the curb for a good long time. So a few things that inside of that is, this kind of job rotation is coming back. Something that was, alive and well in the 80s. A friend of mine says that's what I call progress, going back to the way we used to do things, right? And so, but we started thinking that you hired a college graduate or people were responsible for training themselves. And I certainly think that you have personal responsibility for keeping your skills relevant. Right. I absolutely believe that as a bedrock. But you can't grow in isolation either. And so being very intentional, and I've used that word a couple of times around this, and investing in the growth of people. That might be formal training. It might be all kinds of things. It might be job rotation. It might be letting people apply to projects that they're interested in working on, just a whole lot of different structures. And I heard a great talk one time by Peter Capelli. He's out of Wharton. He has a new book out on hybrid work that's really good. And he was debunking this myth that there's a skills gap that colleges have created, 15 or 20 years ago. He said colleges never prepared you for 98% of jobs. They showed that it was a proof that you showed up somewhere consistently for 4 years and finished a course of study. I mean, some jobs are highly technical, maybe.
That's right.
But most not. I mean, I have a degree in English, and a lot of HR people have degrees in English. I guess we're, bibliophiles, I don't know. So and what he was saying is what we did is we dismantled corporate training and learning and development because it was a cost center and we couldn't immediately see the results. Part of that was not great training, right? The adults don't really respond to being barked a whole bunch of information and then regurgitating it. So seeing much more experiential now coming back into play, on the job training, job shadowing, all of those things. And there's new things too. I'm just saying the ones that used to be, they're coming back, not investing in upskilling your people. Every article you read right now about leadership is talking about upskilling.
I mean, I honestly think that that's one of the best things that you can do in terms of employee engagement and retention.
Absolutely.
I think that you may not be able to guarantee me a job forever, but if you're guaranteeing that my skills are going to be fresh, so that if something does happen, I'm going to be competitive, I think that goes a long way. Also, a lot of the things we're talking about really speak to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. People want to feel safe in the workplace. They want to feel connection. They want to feel that they're learning and growing. They want to feel challenged. All of that goes back to fundamental human needs. And so I think you're spot on when you're saying that feeling that you're learning is something that really speaks to us at the core in terms of being a human being. So
being cared for. I mean, of all of the jobs that an HR person has, right? We're kind of jailhouse lawyers, to use a bad term, because we don't have law degrees, we
Psychotherapist
practice
as
law.
well.
You know, we're chair-side therapists, even though we don't have degrees in therapy. We're business analysts when we're trying to do gap analysis, and
Social
project
workers, here's where
managers.
you go, all of it.
All of it combined with this learning organizations is what we're all trying to be. And that's a term that's also coming out of the 90s or early thousands, right? To become a learning organization, but not paying lip service. And this is really impacted, by the way, how we at Merit talk to clients about when they talk about what they're looking for. Because years of experience, exact skill set. What about transferable skills? The skill of the future, which was something I heard 15 years ago, is the ability to learn. Things are changing, and interest in doing so, by the way.
Yes.
So that individual passion, a sense of individual accountability, but also designing systems where people who want to learn can and don't feel trapped, because if they feel trapped, they leave.
They
And
leave.
they've lost all of that knowledge. So, some companies are really rethinking college altogether. I don't know if I go that far, but at the same time, I've asked, you really would rather have somebody with 3 years of experience and a degree that isn't even in human resources, which is still not as common a degree, than somebody who has demonstrated that they can do this job for 10 or 15. I would never go to the college route, just if I had a known entity
That's right.
in hand. And like I said, it's exciting for people who want to do really creative work around that.
So I'm going to
I was going to say, one of our participants on the webinar did notice that, yes, the focus on learning and development is very refreshing. And along those lines, another individual, and I want to get your comment on this, did something else in the chat, said, there is a mental health first aid certification HR that managers or anyone can get. I'm enrolling in the class later this month. And so I'm just curious, anything you've heard about that, or how that might impact the tenor of what we're talking about right now?
So that was Jennifer, our friend Gotti, who asked that question. And so hello, Jennifer, out there in the world. I'm going to speak before Danika on this one, in that I've always said that my vision for HR is Whoopi Goldberg on Star Trek, walking around kind of being this spiritual, psychological guide, on the starship, because I do think that as people keep bringing their whole selves to work, more and more you're going to have to contend with the depression and the loss and all the family issues that come up. And so I'm all for it, Jennifer. So I think it's great that you're registering for it. And I'm going to ask Danika what she thinks.
I think it's fantastic. I've not heard of it. I am surrounded by stacks and stacks of books. That's how I absorb information. And, the whole birth of the emotional intelligence movement in management kind of touched on this at the beginning about being able to relate. And certainly that's a key skill set for good people is an ability to relate with others and establish trust, and all of those good things. And especially, HR people see people on their best day when you're hiring them, and on most of the worst days that ever touch the workplace come into HR. So I think that, thank you for sharing the link there, Jennifer. I think that the more prepared we can be as these professionals to help people on their journey, the better it is for everyone. And on that talent development, there's the whole learning and development piece. And then I'll comment on two others, and then we can move on. Eugene, is, the other thing that's just ripe for getting blown up that very much impacts culture and talent acquisition, retention, talent development, is performance management. It still amazes me how prevalent the annual performance review as an event that is very much designed for pitting people in competition for scarce resources against each other. It's still everywhere. And it's not new that doesn't work, by the way. I worked in a financial services company 20 years ago in the Central Valley. No one thinks that that is an innovative place. And we ditched it. And it was not because there was some best practice or all of this research. It's because the managers didn't want to do it, the employees didn't want to do it, and it wasn't accomplishing any of the goals. So
I think you just hit the nail on the head. I think it's kind of the fear of just giving people feedback that ended up putting in a structure that otherwise I think should just be a human skill in terms of communication that happens on a regular basis.
At that organization, there's tons of literature, if you need to support it with literature, that the right thing to do is just have conversations with people, real conversations that aren't what I call one up, one down, where you're positioning yourself as the evaluator. No one likes that. Most people who are the evaluator don't even like it. Some do, they're a little out there. But so we put in what we called GDPs, growth and development plans. They were monthly one-on-ones that were 15 to 20-minute meetings. We had cascading goals through the organization. And I'm so proud of that work, mostly because it was so long ago. And it really worked in that environment.
What I like about
made
that,
people, pardon?
What I like about that is that because the world is changing so much, doing it on a monthly basis allows you the space to pivot if you need to.
Absolutely. You can course correct, right? And I think that we've all heard that people will follow their strategy over a cliff. So it requires you to be much more aware of what's absolutely working. And it's so much easier to make minor adjustments to something than it is to change it wholesale. And plus, in those evaluations, I used to call it the birthday card effect, because the other thing is you tie compensation to that one conversation that you've had. And I used to do a training on it called the birthday card effect. And I used my kids as an example that, they'd get a birthday card and, they'd look at it and they'd be like, I got $5. And I'd be like, well, who's it from? What'd they say? And they'd go down and pick up the card off the ground where they dropped it. Because most performance evaluations that are an annual event that combine it with salary review, it's 4%. That's the only thing that people remember. And then the last part of that is we, at this organization, we really separated out if there was a performance improvement issue, we dealt with that separately. So that was a unique conversation, not part of everything else, because some people will only hear the bad, some people will only hear the good. So be more specific about what you're talking about with employees. And so I think the role of the manager is really morphing from command and control, which we've heard from a long time, to coaching and development, which is a whole new skill set for most managers, which is why I'm sure DILAN Consulting Group has lots of business around this, because there's just a bigger expectation that management, that what management means is coaching people to be their best. Yeah. And I think that's a refreshing change. It makes it a fascinating profession. And then this will have huge impacts on compensation, obviously, as you redo all of these things. The whole social contract is I trade my talents for your money. And it's going to be more project-based. It's going to be more teams-based. We keep talking about how collaboration is the most important skill we want. It's in every job description, and yet we only reward the top performer who may or may not be collaborative because they may be slicing off all the competition. So these are big, interesting things to think about from a leadership perspective.
Danika, that's all great. I'm going to ask you one more question, and then I'm going to open it up to see if there are other questions for us. But this one question kind of may or may not be relevant, but historically, HR has sometimes been seen as the cop or an agent of the management team. And I think, again, we're in a crucial period. And as you've said, it's always, a turbulent time in the world of HR. But how do we kind of finally kind of put that to sleep and leave it behind? And what might HR people do to kind of help to shift that view of HR professionals?
Well, that's a complicated question to answer in a couple minutes, and I'm verbose. So I blame two people for that. I blame organizations that don't hold their managers accountable for their responsibility of being talent leaders, and so they punt it to HR because they don't want to be the bad guy. And then I also blame HR people that some people like that, right? There is a feeling of ego and control, and HR can be a position where you don't feel like you have a lot of traditional control. It's a position where you lead through influence so much. And if you like that, the discipline cop side, I really wish you'd go choose another profession, because it's what leads to a lack of trust in HR people. And there are people who like it. They're a small percentage, but they're the ones you remember and that the stories get circulated about. So I know that at times I was called Dr. Death because I was the one who fired everybody. In a company of 500 people, I fired everyone. That's not a best practice now. And I think a lot of it comes out of liability. Eugene, we've mentioned this a couple of times. It's the same reason, by the way, that I think performance evaluations are designed the way they are. Our employee handbooks is we're so afraid of getting sued that we forget that these are supposed to be development tools. And instead we're using them as defense tools. So that's a difficult fence to straddle. And I'm not suggesting that we do things that aren't defensible in our organizations where we get sued, but I think we might have gone too far. And let's make sure that we protect ourselves from liability without giving any consideration on what the impact of those actions might be.
I love that. Development instead of defense.
Yeah. And then lastly, if you're looking for how to influence your organization, HR people, focus on the culture and the development rather than making yourself a gatekeeper. So that, again, I blame HR for that. And we come back to, we come back to what we've already said, morphing more into a coach, teaching people to fish, as you might say, that as being a responsibility of all leaders, with HR and others such as yourself, helping people figure these situations out and how to best handle them, rather than having HR be the nexus of every bad thing that happens in an organization.
Yeah, I think that was well said. I think we have time for one question. So Paul, choose wisely. And if you have a question for Danika.
We don't have any questions that have come in beyond the ones that have already been posed through the chat and the QA. So if there was any last question, Eugene, that you had on the top of your mind, now is the time to do it.
I'm just looking here to see if there's anything that I've really missed. And, I've kind of hit it all. And you actually answered some of my questions and some of your answers for the other questions, Danika. So what I'm going to say is thank you so much, Danika. I cannot say enough how you hit every salient point, from developing people to becoming a coach to focusing on learning. All the things that I think are really going to be transformative going forward to this profession. I want more time with you, and I think most people who've been listening and have stayed with us probably want the same, because you really do have a lot of deep knowledge that a lot of us really need in order to be good partners with HR. And so thank you so much. I don't know if you want to make any closing comment before we close.
Just very much enjoyed our chat, as I always do. And with as much as we covered, there's so much more. There's more, right? And that is the fascinating part of this work. There's always more. And at the end of the day, if you do it well, you help other people. And that helps organizations thrive, because great organizations are great people, and great people need great HR people.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, I just think how exciting to be in a field that is changing, because I think as an individual who does work, the thing that keeps me engaged is that it's always changing, right? And the idea of helping people, again, something that really appeals to me. So for those of you who are in the field, keep doing the great work. And thank you very much. And we will see you soon. Paul, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. And if you were intrigued by what you have just heard from our esteemed speaker today, this is how you can get a hold of her and her organization, Merit MeritHR. Contact info is on your screen. Please feel free to reach out to her to continue this conversation and to see if you and your organization can benefit from some of the services that she may be able to provide you all. In addition, if you want to get a hold of us at DILAN Consulting Group, this is our contact information. We are always available to help you with your organization development, leadership, executive coaching, change management, you name it, needs within the field of OD. Reach out to us here at DILAN Consulting Group. And we thank you very much for attending today's webinar. You will be getting an email sometime in the next 24 hours that'll have information about the survey about today's webinar, as well as a link to the recording of today's webinar that'll be posted on our YouTube channel. Thank you very much. Until next time, we'll see you then. Bye-bye.